Welcome in, Blackhawks fans. It's Tony Marchese alongside Steve. Here it's Four Feathers Podcast. We are back talking Blackhawks hockey. We've got plenty of good topics to talk about. Things are going great here. Steve, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. The weather is awesome over here in California. It's like I think 80 degrees outside, so I can't complain about that. But I can and will complain about the Blackhawks. So yeah, a lot of thoughts on what's going on over there.
There's plenty to complain about there in Blackhawks land, and we're going to get to some of that in just a minute here. It's not 70, 80 degrees by me, although it has been a warm week in Chicago. We've gotten some mid 50 degree weather. It's better than most. I mean, it could be much worse over here. But speaking of worse, we'll talk about the Blackhawks. Just recent stretch of games recently. We've got some Seth Jones comments and different discussion to have around the Blackhawks. You want to call him highest paid player and probably their loudest and most critical player on the roster right now. And there's a lot to dissect there. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with Lucas Reichel. Another healthy scratch for him tonight as the Blackhawks are set to take on the Vegas Golden Knights coming up in just over an hour. Sort of a pre-game Four Feathers episode coming your way tonight here from On Tap Sportsnet. And we'll, of course, do most of our normal segments. But before we get into all that, most of you probably were introduced to Steve on these airwaves last week. He did a show with our guy, Ron Luce. And Steve has recently joined Four Feathers. He's doing an awesome job covering this team over at ontapsportsnet.com. I highly encourage you all to check out his work on tapsportsnet.com in the Blackhawks section. Steve, you've been doing this for what, 2 months now?
Yeah, right before the Winter Classic. And thanks. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. We love having you aboard here, and your work's been fantastic. Just every day these recaps, man, you're killing it over there. But let's get into the actual Blackhawks here, Steve. It has not been pretty since the return from the Four Nations Faceoff. It was an excellent tournament. I know you and Ron got to kind of break that down a little bit on our last episode that I wasn't present for, but it was a wonderful tournament. I think it was good for hockey, and you guys covered most of that. So I'll leave that to the other episode. But the Hawks, on the other hand, boy, has it been a rude awakening. If you watched the Four Nations face-off tournament, to come back and tune into Blackhawks hockey, Chicago Blackhawks hockey has been just abysmal since the break. They came out slow. They lost their first matchup out of the break in Columbus, 5-1. It was pretty embarrassing by every way you can put it. Then followed that up with a 5-2 loss at home on Sunday night to Toronto. There were portions of that game where they were in it. It was also Frank Pellico's last night on the Oregon. It was a cool night to be in the building. We'll get to some of that in a minute. And then a 2-1 loss to Utah in a game that felt like the Blackhawks could have won, but just did not have enough to hold off Utah Hockey Club. Terrible name. Utah Hockey Club from coming back in that one and beating the Chicago Blackhawks late there in the third. So, Steve, we'll start with Columbus. This game, to me, was probably the worst of the set of three. Craig Smith, I believe, came out with some pretty damning comments after the game. Said in the NHL that game prep starts 48 hours before you take the ice, and he didn't feel like that was happening after that loss. I didn't like that quote at all. It just felt like, hey, I thought something was supposed to change after Luke Richardson. I know we're going to get into some Andrew Sorensen talk later on in the show, but this is, I guess, the first stone, I guess, that leads us down that path. What are your takeaways from that 5-1 drubbing on Saturday in the first of the back-to-backs?
Well, to be honest, that game going into it, I wasn't too surprised that the Hawks lost it just because of how well the Blue Jackets have been surprisingly playing this season. And I had a feeling with the Blackhawks, how they came out of the Christmas break, that they were going to be a little slow to start after the Four Nations break. And that kind of happened against Columbus. But the thing is like, this isn't a team where it's like the Vegas Golden Knights, where they're going to completely outclass the Blackhawks, because the Blackhawks, they had a chance to play competitively. And that's the thing too, is like, it wasn't even just like the blowout. Well, I guess it is the blowout that kind of pisses me off, but it's like, yeah, sure, they didn't get a win, but it's the manner that they didn't win. And it continued throughout the entire week.
It absolutely did. And this was just a bit of an interesting game too here, in the sense that it's the last time that we've seen Lucas Reichel, and he only skated 11 minutes, 17 seconds time on ice. He was sort of just buried there. Another name that also didn't see a lot of ice time in that game was Landon Slaggert, someone who I thought should probably get a little bit more ice time, just given the nature of where we're at in the schedule and in the season with the young guys, but sort of got buried there. There wasn't a whole lot of offense in this game from the Blackhawks, like to even really talk about. You had Craig Smith scores the only goal in this one, and everybody else, sort of the big names, not really present too much on the score sheet here, Steve. Just another one of these frustrating February games that we've seen. This team has only won one so far. We've got a chance tonight to make it two, but this one also carried a little bit of weight around it with some of the Seth Jones trade rumors. Did speak to the media on that one and said that he was, potentially willing to have a reunion in Columbus if that were available to him. And you started to get the leak out of Seth Jones asking to be traded, and that's something that we're going to go full in depth on after we get through these games. But just from a timeline perspective, it didn't really seem like a cohesive group entering the restart after the break. And I think you nailed it on the head, Steve, with the comments about, how they came out of the Christmas break, and it was sort of slow there as well too. I don't really have too much more on this one unless you do, but that is a game that I just sort of want to erase from my memory. Unfortunately, we're here talking about it, but
one quick thing I did want to notice is that Bedard, when he was playing with Slaggert and Donato, they only had a 27 Corsi. So they only, when they were on the ice, the Blackhawks owned 27% of shot attempts at 5-5.
Good note there. Good note there. And we're going to get into the line blender with this one because we've seen a lot of juggling lines, especially with Bedard and that first line. I think we've seen 6 names on there over the course of the stretch of these 3 games. And I'm fully prepared to see probably another 2 names inserted up there on the top line tonight. Various points throughout the game, but Saturday was bad. Sunday was also bad too. Like we're going to keep with the theme of just bad hockey. Toronto comes into town on the second night of the back-to-back. I thought Arvid Soderblom played pretty decently in this one, but the story of that night is really Frank Pellico's last game. Was announced shortly before the game that it would be his last time on the organ. I was in attendance for this one. The anthem, which they did not show, I believe, on the ESPN Hulu broadcast, very much a disservice to Frank Pellico's 33 years of service on that organ, but at least I was there in attendance to see it. I could tell you it was a loud one. The crowd wasn't as full as I've seen Sunday night 6:00 starts, but they did get loud for Frank Pellico, so I'm happy about that. Not happy with what transpired though thereafter. Steve, thoughts from this game?
So with Frank, that was something I noticed too, because I was watching it through ESPN Plus, and kind of disappointing that I didn't get to see the anthem. But it was only on ESPN Plus, and so I do know, that's not something that the Blackhawks could really control. So I'm sure there's some sort of weird, NHL broadcasting rights or something. But still, I was looking forward to hearing his organ playing skills with the anthem going on, and I saw a tweet about it afterwards. It looked awesome, so I'm jealous of you and Ron. But for the game itself, this is one where like I kind of like expected like that the Maple Leafs would probably beat the Hawks. I did have it as the one win that the Hawks were going to get after the Four Nations break. I thought that they maybe could pull something out, and this would be one of those weird hockey wins. But the Hawks, they started pretty good. They generated, I think, 6 shots on goal by the 15-minute mark. And then right away
they did come out of the gate very hot in that game.
And then I think they kind of caught the Leafs off guard, because then the Leafs woke up and then they kind of dominated the rest of the period. And it was just kind of the same story where the Blackhawks, they can't get good puck possession, and specifically to this game, when they did have some time in the offensive zone, all their shots were pushed to the perimeter, so they couldn't get any high quality shots on the net. So it's like kind of just a half-hearted effort. Their breakout sucks, something that's been a theme throughout every single game. A lot of problems when entering the zone. So it was just kind of not a good one.
No, it wasn't. And especially the Hawks did get a first period goal from Teuvo Teravainen. It was, they haven't won in their Winter Classic jerseys yet, Steve. That's another note from this game that I had. But, I've got the Teuvo Teravainen Winter Classic jersey, seen him score in that. A cool moment. They came out of the gate hot. And then it was, you get Max Domi on an assist for Robertson. You've got Jake McCabe coming in and scoring in the second period. Then you get Robertson again from Domi. They just sort of took off there in the second period. It felt like a foot off the gas, almost. We've seen this before. You've watched Blackhawks hockey. You can tell when the foot comes off the gas pedal. And 3 goals in a row from Toronto. It was really hard to sort of battle back from that. Phil Kurchev did put one in right there at the end of the second period that sort of gave you some hope. And then it was just all Toronto in the third. Nothing the Hawks can do. It was a pretty somber walk out of the United Center, if I do say so myself. But I guess the real thing that we wanted to be there for was Frank Pellico's last night on the organ, and they did let him open it up. He got a huge ovation midway through the game there too as well. So it was not a bad night at the United Center in all aspects, but definitely not something that I enjoy is walking out of the United Center after a Blackhawks loss and having to make that ride back home. But just another tough game. They dropped both of them in the back-to-back over the weekend, and then they head on off to Utah. This is a West Coast trip. Or just a West trip, so to speak. But it didn't start out too well in Utah either. Although the Blackhawks, this game was kind of wild. There was a lot of missed calls, I would say. I hate to be the one that complains about the ref all the time, Steve, but what the hell was going on there in Utah? This was almost too egregious in my opinion.
No. I agree with you, Tony. There was a lot of soft calls and a ton of non-calls, and that's kind of been the trend with Bedard, is that they don't call stuff on him. It's kind of frustrating.
What do you think that is? Is it Bedard doesn't know how to draw penalties? Is it? I mean, we can put the tinfoil hats on here, Steve, for just a little bit and figure this one out, because I've been trying to figure out what it is about Connor Bedard and not getting calls. He could be in the corner, get boarded, and it's like he was invisible. There's other times where he's coming up the ice. I've seen hooks on him go uncalled. I've seen trips on him go uncalled. And then I think it was Connor Murphy who goes and stands up for him there. I believe it was in the first period, might have been the second, but Connor Murphy goes into the corner and sort of just hugs someone for, I don't know, maybe 2-3 seconds. And next thing you know, he's off to the box. Like, what is going on here? I didn't get that at all.
No, neither did I. It's kind of frustrating. Even though the Blackhawks are really good on the PK, but it's like like you want to see them go on the power play. Especially if Bedard pulls a penalty, get him on the power play, and yeah, I don't know. It's kind of frustrating. And it was
I
definitely
would like
evident.
I would like to see him draw some penalties on zone entries.
Yeah,
I mean, it feels like that's where the Hawks take a decent amount of calls themselves. And Bedard, it just seems like you could throw two guys on him, do whatever you want to him. And that seems to be the playbook defensively for any team who plays the Hawks. And, part of that is a lack of offensive talent that we've talked about on the show for a long time. And I think some of that just, maybe we need to send Bedard to acting school a little bit, figure out how to get those calls. Maybe it's his demeanor I'm not sure. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely bothersome. I can see it in your rookie year. I can still see it being, okay, he's young. He hasn't earned that yet. But you don't see that with the game's other stars at all.
yeah, not to the extent with Bedard. You do see it with like McDavid. Sometimes he'll get somebody doing something to him, and nobody calls it, but it's definitely noticeable with Bedard. I don't know if it's kind of like multiplied just because he's young and he's a star. So I don't know.
I don't either, but either way, something's got to change there, in my opinion. If we're gonna try and get through this, I'd like to see a game called fair and square. That's just me. I don't know, but this was probably the most anger I've had at my television so far this season. But
Okay.
I digress. Seth Jones opened the scoring in this one, took Blackhawks' early lead on a power play, actually. So that was good to see. Although, I don't know about you, this is just my feeling on this. It felt like on that power play, Seth Jones knew that there was a ton of scouts there to see Seth Jones. That was my first reaction after he scored that goal, because he sort of held on to that puck for a little while, went in and made a very aggressive move and sniped one. It was a beautiful goal. But that definitely seemed to be a message sender. Like, we haven't seen Seth Jones take over and dominate like that on the power play in a bit. Like, it's been a while, and it's like, where has that been?
Yeah. Real quick, want to point out Bedard made a great play to pull everybody away from Jones to get that goal. But yeah, like where has that been? And when we talk about Jones, that's something too with his comments. There's a lot of things that are starting to show now that it's kind of making it vocal that he wants out. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And again, we'll get to that in just a moment, but that was it for offense from the Chicago Blackhawks in that one. Clayton Keller ties that one up in the second, and the Utah Hockey Club, once again, terrible name, goes on to win it with a third period goal. Hawks basically spent, it felt like, most of this game on the PK. The PK was great, though. Really nothing to complain about there. Arvid Soderblom, again, was fantastic in net. He was, first star worthy. I believe they had 37 shots on goal, made 35 saves in that one. So he had plenty of work. Hawks were terrible at the dot in this one as well. It was a 38.5% to 61.5% for Utah. Just not a whole lot there. Hawks were blocking some shots, though, in this one. 19 block shots for the Hawks as well. So, I mean, this tells me one thing, Steve. There was no offense being generated. Yeah, they did not have the puck. And I'm hoping things change tonight in Vegas, but I guess I'm not really too hopeful that it will. But, man, this was sort of a frustrating and boring game to watch overall, unless you're a big fan of watching your own goaltender flop around and make saves for about an hour and a half. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, and then with that game too, Utah had 93 shot attempts, and the Blackhawks, I don't have their number up here, but it was nowhere near that. So
Did you say
They
92?
93 shot attempts.
93.
Yeah.
That's not good.
No, and like we said with the Blue Jackets, like this is Utah. Like, they, when they were Arizona, like they weren't even sniffing the playoffs. This year they are, but like, this is not a team that the Blackhawks should be getting dominated like this. So it's this one was my game that was the most frustrating during the week. Just because of like they didn't look like they cared. And up and down the lineup with everybody, especially the veterans, which I'll bring up when we talk about Jones. But it's frustrating. Yeah.
We're going to talk about Jones because the comments come right after this game, Steve. In the locker room post game, there was some stuff said by Mr. Seth Jones, and I'll get that in just a second here. But definitely the frustrations from Seth Jones kind of start to shine through in this one. I do know via X.com, looking at, I believe it was Tam Bamford's page before this one, that there were a plethora of scouts in attendance for this game. And then, you see the Seth Jones goal, the game get away from the Blackhawks. And here comes comments from Jones. We're the exact same team right now as we were game one. It's pretty evident out there. We haven't made any strides to be a better, more simple hockey team, and it shows. We don't get a lot of wins because of that. This has been almost 4 years of bottom of the league, so it's not just this year, for me at least. I don't know about you, but I was expecting something like this to come up maybe even prior to the Luke Richardson fire. Because if the comments from Jones, and I think that they're fair comments, I don't think he's wrong by any stretch of the imagination. We've watched this team over the past couple of years. We know where the deficiencies are. We know exactly what's going wrong. We see it on the ice night in and night out. The fact that it took until, what was this? February 23rd, 25th, somewhere along the line, 25th. The fact that it took until February 25th of year 4 before you see a veteran blow a gasket into the media and voice frustration is surprising to me. And the reason it's surprising to me is not many losing teams that have a veteran presence sort of really tolerate this. We heard some comments last year from Nick Foligno, but they were more deemed in a positive sense. And I'll get into Foligno with this a little bit as well, too, because I want to hear from him on this as well. And I don't think that we've heard enough from Nick Foligno this year. But that being said, what Jones is saying here isn't wrong. They have been at the bottom of the league. There hasn't been market improvement. You fired Luke Richardson to try and jumpstart some stuff, but also maybe figured out as an organization that he wasn't going to be the guy going forward. But I think I asked you this in a text the other day. Has there ever been a head coach or an interim head coach fired mid-season after taking the reins over? It's this type of stuff is, you're laughing. It's funny, but it's also bad. Like, that's nervous laughter right there, because I don't know what else to say on this. You get a comment like that, normally it should fire some people up, or there's, something's going on. This is prefaced by Jones openly going out to the media just days prior and saying that, he would welcome a trade and he wants to go to a winning organization. If he's sitting here saying that this team hasn't taken a step forward in the 4 years that he's been here, number one, I guess it's fair criticism to go back and ask Seth Jones, like, what have you done to improve? What have you personally, accomplished on the ice? And let's take a look at your resume and your stat sheet. And I'm sure that we can find angles to attack there as well. However, it was never Jones's responsibility when Stan Bowman signed him to this deal to come in here and lead a rebuild and do all of that stuff. My personal opinion on this, Seth Jones wanted the captaincy last year. That was a storyline heading into last season, was, him being vocal and saying that he wanted to wear the C. Obviously, we know that didn't happen. The Hawks went all last year without a captain. Jones has had an A on his chest. But this is the first time, I think, really, in Seth Jones' tenure in Chicago that you've seen this side of Seth Jones, because he's always been a little bit more quiet, a little bit more reserved. He's spoken out at certain points in time for, personal wants. The real story that I can point to is when he wanted the captaincy. And I believe the messaging from Kyle Davidson back down was, you don't have to wear the C to be a leader on this team. Like, show it through your actions. But I'm really sort of, I guess, not happy with the leaders on this team right now, from Foligno on anybody wearing a letter, because I think we've heard more from Connor Bedard than we've heard from some of these veterans, and that's fine. Yeah. But I wrote this going into this year when Foligno was named the captain. We discussed it on the show. Their job was to take the spotlight off of Connor Bedard, not firmly plant it on him and let him take all of the media coverage, all of the media hits, everything that's there. Where are the leaders, Steve? Apparently, they're disgruntled. And that's not a good recipe for success by any stretch of the imagination. I think the whole entire thing is giant red flags organizationally through the rebuild process, from the front office down to the coaching staff, down to the assistant coaches, up through the first layer of player leadership. It seems disjointed right now. It doesn't seem to be a thing that can heal, especially with Seth Jones still in town. And I think you've lost a lot of leverage trying to move Seth Jones, even if you had any leverage beforehand. Him tipping the hand that he wants to leave, sort of limit the destinations, as well as, basically saying that this team is not one that he is proud to be playing for currently. You lose a lot of that leverage if you're Kyle Davidson. So I'm curious for your thoughts on this. I've been long-winded on it, but I had a lot to get off my chest here with this. So I'll turn it back over to you, Steve, for your thoughts on the Seth Jones saga.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. And one thing, like, whenever I get critical with the Blackhawks, I always feel like I have to say, like, we all understand that this is a rebuild. And there's a portion of the fan base that are very defensive of whatever it is that the Blackhawks organization does, just because it's a rebuild. We all get it. That's a long, slow process. Nobody needs to hear that a million times. But when there's cracks and there's things that are concerning, I think you should absolutely bring it up. You should question it. And so going with what Seth Jones said, I think everything he said was right. He's not wrong. He didn't say anything wrong, but kind of like what you were saying, and Frank Saravalli was saying this on the DFO rundown, was what bothered him and kind of bothers me too, is like, why wait this long to make these comments? And like, he's a leader, so there's probably a lot of stuff that we won't ever see that goes on in the locker room that he does, and I'm sure. But like, he never says any of this stuff to the media, and it's not just him, like you said. Like Nick Foligno, last year we heard a lot from him. I liked what he was saying, but I was like kind of hoping, like, man, if this guy is going to be the next captain, I hope what he's doing right now isn't lip service. And I hate to say it, but like, it really felt like it was just lip service, because I don't see him saying any of that stuff. And sure, it was repetitive. And like, if you were on this team, what else are you going to say, really? But that's the thing, is like, these guys are leaders. They should say something. They should get in front of the cameras and say something to speak up for this team. Because right now, there's nothing blocking my frustration on the players. There's nothing blocking outside people who are looking at this team going like, what the hell is going on with the Blackhawks? Because I think The Athletic, they had like an article out where they were interviewing or asking questions from agents, and the Blackhawks, they kind of got hit in that article. So people they're not looking at Chicago right now thinking like this is a great team to be a part of. You got Seth Jones just suddenly being very vocal about how unhappy he is with the team and how they're playing. And you got a lot of veteran players that, where are they? And their play on the ice, even though they're not great players, it's not backing up anything that they're saying. Nick Foligno, all the stuff that he was preaching last year, if you watch him carefully, it's like he's not playing like he cares either. So like at the same time, if he were to go out in front of the cameras and call everybody out, like I would ask him to like, hey man, you gotta look at your own game first, because I was watching him play along the boards and like he looked like he was just like half-heartedly trying to tickle the guy. Like, it's frustrating, and a lot of these players are people that Kyle Davidson brought onto the team, and that's where my concern is at. Is these were players brought in to meet a specific goal that's not getting met right now.
Very well said. And I agree with you on the fact that these are Kyle Davidson's guys. And the evaluation period on Kyle Davidson has started. It really started, I think, this year. I don't think there's too many people that are happy with the way that this year has gone. And I love how you prefaced it with, this is a rebuild. I don't think that anybody really expected this team to sniff, contention by any stretch of the imagination this year. But we were told it was going to be better. That was something we were told. We were told that they were tired of being at the bottom of the league. You bring up the Nick Foligno comments from last year, and yes, it was repetitive, but it was about playing a good brand of hockey. It was about playing responsible hockey. It was about finishing checks. It was about, being physical. It was, you saw the videos of Foligno next to Connor Bedard talking about, things that he needs to learn and the teaching moments. I haven't seen a lot of that bonding going on with this current set of players, and I don't know what that reasoning is. Who knows? But that it hasn't really been a topic that a lot of Hawks fans have gone down that rabbit hole and talked about. But this thing just felt like failure to launch by the time we got into November. And, as this season wears on, I'm sure that, some veteran guys are probably looking at different destinations and thinking, where can I be in May and potentially June? If I get moved here in the next month, it's decision time. These are all human beings as well. We talk about that at every trade deadline, and, what makes sense for, some of these vets with families, and what are you trying to do, and what are you trying to accomplish based on your contract status heading into the final months of the NHL season. The thing that really bothers me is that the guys who have longer term here in Chicago, I'm talking Teravainen, Bertuzzi, the likes of those veterans, you're not really hearing anything from them either. It's sort of silent. And, I appreciate, and you'll probably get a chuckle at this one, I appreciate Tyler Bertuzzi's late game heroics by being the only person that goes to the front of the net and potentially tip a cross ice pass in when the Hawks have the goalie pulled. Seems to be his specialty. But like, other than that, like, I don't feel like some of these guys are offering that level of physicality and that level of high intensity play that I've seen from them at different stops within their career. Because we don't have to rewind the tape too far to go back to last year and say, where was this level of play this year from Tyler Bertuzzi? Where was this level of play from Teuvo Teravainen? Sure, they've got an extra year of miles on their body than they did last year. But this team also, Steve, if you look at it top to bottom, this is nowhere near the injury bugs that plagued the Chicago Blackhawks last season. There's not really like a smoking gun excuse for this team's poor play. There is none. You're not missing critical pieces of your team. You're not like it's just bad hockey from A to B to C, all the way down, all the way through Z, with some, I would say, decent goaltending from Arvid Soderblom and an underperformance from Peter Mrazek than what we've seen beforehand. But when you look at this overall, there isn't one real huge positive that's come out of this team this year. Bedard has been Bedard, but he hasn't hit the next gear. Frank Nazar's been nice. I've liked that, but I wouldn't call that a resounding success story. Landon Slaggert, playing 11 minutes. Lucas Reichel, same shit. So Seth Jones isn't wrong. We tie this back to Seth Jones. He's not wrong. It's the same thing. But that's where you have to question, okay, this is if this is a rebuild, we might need to start revamping some of the parts around this, whether they be players, whether it be training and development. But if your guy that was in Rockford comes up to the NHL, you see no improvement from that. Even for the young developing guys, there's some red flags here, Steve. There's some red flags. And I think it's okay as a Hawks fan, as someone who invests their time and their money into watching that product, to question what is the direction here. I will say it was a good move from the Blackhawks when they announced season ticket renewal prices, that they only had a 1% increase compared to the 10% the Chicago Bears are hitting their fans with. But, you saw a 6% increase for season ticket holders last season, and you've got a worse product. And it's just, my thought process here. People don't like to pay more for worse. So, they're going to have to do something. I know Ron has said this ad nauseum over and over again, that this is going to be a huge summer for Kyle Davidson to get some things squared away. But I think, before we put the cart before the horse, this trade deadline is going to be interesting, more interesting than I thought it was going to be about a month ago, with the inclusion of Jones. So I got to have your prediction here, Steve. Is Seth Jones moved before the deadline? Because we've heard, the same things coming from Hawks camp. They're not exactly inclined to have to move him, and they're fine keeping him here. But I just don't understand how on God's green earth you can leave Seth Jones on this roster after what was said now publicly about wanting to leave, and then double down with, this has been almost 4 years, the bottom of the league. It's, it's not just this year, all the stuff that he said after that game. He did give some stick taps over to Arvid Soderblom. I will throw that in there too as well, but there just doesn't sit well with me. Do you think he's moved?
It's a hard one, because prior to his comments, I didn't think he was even going to be something to be seriously considered moving at the trade deadline. But progressively, the more he says to the media, the more it seems like he's trying to push Kyle Davidson to get them the hell out of Chicago. So right now, where I'm sitting, I don't think he's going to get traded by the deadline. I could see him getting traded by the summer, but I would not be surprised if the Blackhawks somehow make it happen. And the thing is that they're going to have to find a way with his contract, because they have, I believe, one retention slot left for this season. And he's got a $9.5 million contract. He's playing nowhere near what he's earning. So another team, they're going to have to take that in consideration, ask the Blackhawks to eat some of that in retention, which they probably will, although I wouldn't personally like them to retain anything. But I don't know, there's some things that make it a little difficult for Seth Jones to move on out of here. And, just to be clear, I don't think Jones is a bad defenseman. He's good. Nowhere near what he's making. And I think he could play a lot better with the Blackhawks. It just, he didn't really play his cards right. And like you said, it's not really his fault for signing that initial contract with Stan Bowman, because he thought that this team was going to rebuild, but at the same time, going to contend. But at the same time, his agent should have done him a solid and kind of looked at things realistically, because that contract kind of screwed Seth Jones, because he could have already been traded a while ago if his contract wasn't what it is now, and he could be playing for a team that's going to the playoffs and playing for something.
Yeah, you probably would have seen him moved a lot earlier in this process. That said, the Blackhawks blue line would probably miss Seth Jones should he move through the remainder of the season. And I don't know about you, it's already hard to watch that blue line on most nights. And that just means it's more time for TJ Brody on our television screen. So be careful what you wish for. That's all I really got on Seth Jones right now, Steve. Got a couple other quick points to get to here. Lucas Reichel is another healthy scratch tonight, was scratched in the last game as well. Sheltered minutes. I brought this up at the beginning of the show. He's another name that I'm wondering if could potentially be on the move before the trade deadline. I'm not sure what you would get from him. Probably not anything close to what you'd like to get from Lucas Reichel, but he seems, at least to me, to be a potential change of scenery type guy. Any thoughts on Reichel, the recent healthy scratches, and what do you think is going to play out here over the next coming weeks with Lucas Reichel and the Blackhawks?
Yeah, it sucks to see. Unfortunately, I think with the Blackhawks, Lucas Reichel is what he is. I think if he's going to reach anywhere close to what we thought his ceiling was, he's probably going to have to play on a different team. I don't like seeing him bench just because I'd much rather have a young guy out there playing and learning from their mistakes. But, Lucas Reichel hasn't been, as advertised at all. And as far as if he can get traded by the deadline, I could see it happen. He's still a young player. And another GM is going to see that and want to use that as like some sort of project to like bring Lucas Reichel in and turn him into the point producer everybody thought he was going to be. But, the other side of that is I'm not too sure if Kyle Davidson is going to move on from him. Now, Lucas Reichel wasn't drafted by Davidson, so he's not his guy because Davidson seems to be really loyal to the people he's drafted. But Davidson also is kind of reluctant to trade some of these young players where some of them that aren't going to pan out, you can maybe trade them when the league doesn't really know who they are, get a nice return. Because with Lucas Reichel right now, if you were to trade him, I don't know what that would get you either. So I think
Probably something in like the 4th, 5th round, man. That's not what you wanted. Not what you really want as a return from what you had, at least pedigree-wise, on paper a couple of seasons ago.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think he'll get traded. I think he's going to stay. I think if he were to get traded, it's probably going to come next year by next year's deadline if he's not producing. But that's my take on Reichel.
Got it, man. I wouldn't rule out seeing him. Just my personal opinion, I wouldn't rule out seeing him get chipped off, either at this deadline or potentially in some sort of offseason shakeup of this roster. But just another guy in the Blackhawks development system that really never found his gear at the NHL level. And I feel like we've had too many of those come through the system recently, Steve, unfortunately. Couple other news bits to hit on here. I know we sort of touched this a little bit, but Anders Sorensen starting to come under fire a little bit from Blackhawks fans online. I'm starting to see that creep up more and more. This is not his job next season. I'm fully out on even entertaining that. Potentially shipping him back to Rockford. I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he's a terrible coach by any stretch of the imagination, but definitely feels to be in a little bit of over his skis here. It's not exactly working out with him. Too many blowout games. Getting called out for preparation by Craig Smith the other day. Just not a good look, in my opinion, Steve. Any thoughts? You wrote an article on tipsportsnet.com looking at his first 29 games in. Where are you at with Anders Sorensen right now, even since you penned that?
So, before I wrote that, I was really hoping that the Blackhawks weren't going to consider hiring him, maybe do him a solid and get him an interview. And that was before I wrote that article. And in the past week, I'm firmly planted, and he does not need to be the head coach of the Blackhawks. Now, I wouldn't really be concerned with any other team, but my concern is the Blackhawks. They kind of like the people that are already in the organization, and I'm kind of scared that they might pull a Jeremy Colleton and bring him on, but that would be a nightmare. And my thing with Anders is he has blowouts, and initially I was like, all right, cool. So he wants to involve the defenseman more in the rush, or when they're in the offensive zone, he's okay with the defenseman pinching in and getting involved. Great, cool. That's going to open you up to more blowouts because you're going to get one guy defending a 2-on-1. But this team, they don't play like how he wanted or how he was expressing he was going to utilize the defenseman. So I'm not really buying that. A lot of the other stuff, like in that article, a lot of what we're seeing is the same from Luke Richardson. It's just like what Seth Jones said, the same team from day one. And me, like a fan, I'm watching this from my couch. I'm getting frustrated. I can only imagine that like these players are getting frustrated too, because nothing's working. And
the interesting thing with the comments, Steve, too, now that you say that, like it's not even the same team. It's sort of in a worse state than it was before.
Yeah.
But minimal margins, but I mean it's definitely not better.
No, yeah. And like a lot of the decisions that Sorensen makes during the game, it's kind of frustrating to see. Like, he'll consistently play Connor Bedard in the defensive zone against the league's top centers, which cool, I got it. He's got to like learn how to play against those players, but you can't be playing him there every single time where he gets buried in the defensive zone, doesn't get any time in the offensive zone. And I don't know. I get frustrated watching Sorensen's style.
I don't think you're the only one out there that feels that way. Again, February frustration. We had a comment come in while we were talking about some Anders Sorensen stuff. No, Ron is not here today. Ron will be back on the show. He's not going anywhere. Blackhawks are getting our guy Tominato down, and he says Lucas Reichel is probably gone, but he loves his style of play and is really disappointed. I think we're all disappointed in Lucas Reichel's development because this guy was billed as a guy that was going to put a lot of pucks in the back of the net. And how many goals did he have this year? We had 3, 4.
This year he has 5 goals and 11 assists.
5 goals, 11 assists. That's not getting it done. That's not getting it done by any stretch of the imagination. So you're also not going to score goals when you're only playing 11 minutes on the bottom lines and getting healthy scratched. But there's probably a reason you're a healthy scratch when you got that kind of stat line. So I don't think that's problem's going to get solved anytime soon, Steve. It's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And unfortunately, it just hasn't opened up. There's a lot of plays that he makes and it just looks good and there's no finish. I used to think Kirby Doc had problems finishing, but Lucas Reichel has made that look like child's play. Our guy, our first round draft pick, Artem Levshunov, had a little bit of a battle in a Rockford Chicago Wolves game the other day, got himself suspended. Do you think that was intentional? I didn't think that was intentional from Levshunov. Definitely looked like he was concerned after cross-checking an opposing player in looked like the chin area. It's a 1-game suspension. That's just a little Blackhawks news bit here. But I didn't think that was intentional. Artem Levshunov doesn't seem like the kind of guy, at least in the media, and from what I've seen from the minimal amount of Rockford highlights that I've watched so far this season, just doesn't seem like his style of play. But his development this year has been on the slower end too, Steve. And you had mentioned before the show started, you're starting to pick it up a little bit. What do you got for me on Artem Levshunov?
Yeah, I think recently he's kind of figuring out how to play at the pro level. And, to anybody who's doubting Artem Levshunov, I just say, like, if there's a prospect to be patient with, it's going to be him. When he was drafted as a extremely raw defenseman who I think he only played 1 year in the NCAA. And he did really good. But this is his first year as a pro, which maybe he could have probably spent another year in college, but he's not going to be, jumping right away into the NHL. He's a defenseman, which takes a long time as it is. He still has to round out a lot of stuff to his game. So I think Blackhawks fans just need to be patient with Artem. When he comes to the NHL for good, I think he'll be really good. He'll get there.
Patience is a virtue, and most of us are running thin on that virtue right now, Steve, especially with this team. So it's checking in down on the minor leagues. It's gonna be a bit, but we got about 25-ish minutes before the Hawks and Vegas get underway here, Steve. It's the last game in the month of February, an abbreviated February schedule for the Blackhawks. But as I mentioned earlier on in the show, we only have one win in this month. That's probably why things feel so bleak, and we've had so much February frustration. Steve, let's get some game predictions in tonight. I don't foresee the Blackhawks winning this one. I'd be pleasantly surprised with a win. However, I think the Blackhawks finished the calendar month of February with just one victory, and it's going to be a late night for those who stay up here in Chicago. You get the benefit of the doubt. It's only going to be like, 7 o'clock for you?
Yep.
Late one here in Chicago. I'm sure that everybody is excited to tune in to CHSN and watch this broadcast in just a few minutes. So we're going to be wrapping the show up. But before we do, I want your predictions. I'm saying it's a Hawks loss, 4-2. How about you?
I think I got to stick with my prediction from last week, where they're going 1-3 in this stretch. And I think tonight's going to be that win. They're gonna somehow pull one of those weird Hawks victories where they play a team that's way better than them, and they'll somehow get a win. Is it likely? Hell no.
There is something to this team being like a team that plays up to their competition. I expected that in the Toronto game. I think you had mentioned that was your original pick for which one that they were going to get a win on. So they are very much overdue for a couple of victories here. It's got to come at some point, but it's Vegas, man, and I feel like the Hawks don't play Vegas well, even when they play up to other opponents. So, going to be a tough one tonight. I live next to a Vegas Golden Knights fan, so I'm hoping that they can pull one out, and I can send some nasty text messages to my neighbor here in just a little bit. But this is going to be a tough game. A little bit of line juggling going on, Steve. Do you have the lines for tonight?
I can pull them up. I think they took Nazar off the top line. He was with Bedard in the last game.
Yes.
And so we're going to see Bertuzzi and Donato up there with Bedard. We got on the second line, Foligno centering Teravainen and Mikheyev. Nazar is going to be centering the third line with Slaggert and Doc. And then the fourth line, you got Khrushchev centering Maroon and Smith.
Anders Sorensen line blender is in full effect. Let's get the D pairs.
Those are going to be Martinez, Jones. Second pairing is going to be Vlasic and Murphy. And then the third pair is going to be Del Mastro with Brody coming back after being healthy scratched, replacing Nolan Allen. And I don't agree with that. And then Mrazek is going to be in net tonight.
You got any keys to watch for tonight, Steve? What are you looking at? You're gonna be typing up a recap to this, I know, but what are you looking for tonight?
I'm just looking for some clean breakouts. If they can somehow manage that, get through the neutral zone, somehow manage some offensive zone time, things might be okay. But that's a tall order to ask for because these guys cannot break out for shit. So, hopefully Bedard scores too. Yeah,
I'm looking for a Bedard goal. That's what I've got on my radar tonight. It feels like it's been a while since we've seen a highlight reel goal from Bedard. Typically, those come within a few games of me getting on these airwaves and getting angry because we don't have enough Bedard highlights. So I want to see that. The other thing I want to see, you talked about zone entries and breakouts. Can we, for the love of God, like, please stop playing dump and chase with just one guy there when we get to the blue line? Like, I understand it when we're trying to make a change, but I don't know how many times this season I've not seen anybody go for the puck in the corners. It's just really frustrating to watch, but I don't think that that's changing tonight. I don't think that's changing this season. Probably got to wait for a full training camp underneath a different coach to really solidify that. But, sometimes you can be pleasantly surprised by things. Steve, this was an excellent show. Thank you for joining me. Thank you to everybody who tuned into this One Four Feathers podcast. February frustration. It has been a very frustrating February. Looking forward to potentially a better March for the Blackhawks. Some trade deadline activity about to ramp up here as we get near the NHL trade deadline. It's only weeks away now, so a lot to look out for. We'll be back next week. We've got a Hawks game that is about to start in about 20 minutes. Steve, any final thoughts before we close shop?
Let's see a Bedard goal. Let's go Hawks.
Let's go Hawks.